What do model houses and rubber bands have to do with music? Well, first, model houses. In the 2018 film Hereditary, Toni Collette plays a character who builds model houses professionally. The opening of the movie pans through her workspace, where we see the various ultra-realistic models. It starts to zoom in on one of the models, only to find out this special surprise. And in the same way that we start to view these people in the models in a very different way, the same thing can happen with music. Here's an example. The way we hear a note can change depending on its context. If we take this pitch D, and I play this in the context of an E-flat major scale, and if I stop there, many people start to imagine what the next note of the E-flat major scale could be. There's this sense of tension that this is not a stopping place. And for anybody who needs it, there's your resolution. Let's take the very same note, D, and play this in the context of a D major scale. Same note, very different feeling. For many people, in this context, the D feels like it has reached a point of repose. Chords can function the very same way. Depending on the context, we can hear a chord in very different ways. Let's take this chord, for example. This G major chord. I'm going to play this chord in the context of Amazing Grace. And in this first key, it will be in the key of G. And there's the chord. And in this context, it has a relative feeling of resolution. Now, let's play the same example, but in the key of D. There's the chord. The exact same pitches, but it has more of this feeling of tension, like this is not a place that we can stop. And that brings us to our rubber band. In each of these examples, depending on the context, a note or a chord had a feeling of either tension or resolution. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. The most tension that T wants to release into do. Do. Ow. This brings us to our three chord function terms, and they are tonic, predominant, and dominant. We've heard these terms in the context of scale degrees, and now we are using them to apply to chord function. The tonic function chord is the 1 chord. Sometimes the 3 and the 6 chord can be substituted for this tonic function. The predominant function chords are the 2 and the 4. And the dominant function chords are the 5 and the 7. If we follow this pattern of tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic, it gives us one of the most common chord progressions of all time, and that is the 1-4-5-1 chord progression. Now, if we substitute the 2 chord instead of the 4 chord, it gives us a very similar sounding progression that follows the same pattern of tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. We can extend that pattern backwards to give us one of the most powerful chord progressions, this circle progression, and that is 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, which sounds like this. And if you add in our chord substitutions, this gives us the pattern of progressions. Here are two easy ways to visualize this pattern of progressions. The first way is in a linear fashion, in which we start with the 3, which leads to the 6, which leads to the 2, could be substituted by the 4, which leads to the 5, could be substituted with the 7, and then that leads us to our 1 chord. Another way to think about this pattern of progressions is like a solar system. That is, if the center of the solar system, the sun, is the 1 chord, and then we start moving out in concentric orbits. So right outside the 1 chord is the 5 and the 7, and that 5 and the 7 feels the most gravitational pull to lead into the 1. Outside the 5 and the 7 is the orbit of the predominance, and that is the 2 and the 4, which wants to lead into the 5 or 7, which wants to lead into the 1. Outside the predominant is the 6, and outside the 6 is the 3 chord. Now we've been using this word progression, and I want to clarify this in a very specific way. We call a sequence of chords a progression if they're following this circle of fifths pattern toward the 1 chord. So for example, if I have a 3 moving to a 6 chord, that's moving in the direction toward the 1 chord. If I move in the opposite direction, then we call this a retrogression. For example, if I start with a 2 chord and then go to a 6 chord, that would be moving in the direction away from the 1, away from the sun. And here is an example of a super common song that uses chords moving in a progression according to this circle of fifths, and that's Heart and Soul. You might have heard this progression. So that uses the chords 1, 6, 2, 5. 6, 2, 5, which then repeats back into the 1. So that is moving toward the 1 according to the circle of fifths progression, making it an actual progression. And as a bonus, I want to give you one more chord sequence that you're going to find in tons of music. And that's a chord sequence that has a bass line that's just descending by step. So if I'm in the key of F major, I'll have a bass line that sounds like this. And if I harmonize that, I could use the chords 1, 5, 6, 6, 1, 6, 4. There are a variety of ways that these bass notes could be harmonized. This is just one of them. But the main point is that the bass line is descending by step. And a great song that uses this ground bass progression is I'll Be There, originally by Michael Jackson. You and I must make a pact. We must bring salvation back. And it changes. Where there is love,